We're living in a time when global health as well as individual health are part of everyday conversations, more than they've ever been in my lifetime. People are thinking about getting a checkup. They're thinking about supplementation, boosting their immune system, figuring out if they're immunocompromised, trying to figure out what immunocompromised even means. It's an interesting time. And, I have an on-off experience with allopathic medicine. Like a lot of Americans, I was uninsured for a long time. I left the corporate world in my early 20s, and I spent about 8 years with no insurance. As an American, if you don't have a job, you can't really get insured unless you pay quite a bit of money a month, and as a traveling bum yoga teacher, that was kind of impossible. So like a lot of people, I just sort of hoped for the best, and I got lucky. I didn't really get sick, didn't really take antibiotics, didn't really go to the doctor for anything other than like a skin infection from a coral reef nick on my toe and some other silly things. And all things being considered, I was just really quite fortunate. In my 30s, when I finally got insured again, I started being more proactive, and I started going back to the doctor, but in a different kind of way. I started going to the doctor with my desired outcome planned in advance, and it's kind of my new protocol for going to see any medical professional is know your outcome in advance. Know what you'd like to learn, know what you'd like to come away with, whether that's a prescription for amoxicillin for a sinus infection, whether that is a check of your body for melanoma, whether that's whatever it is you're looking for. It's much better if you go in with the desired outcome, because our healthcare system is actually a sick care system. It's mostly reactive, and most people, like me, most of my life, you go to the doctor when something's not working. But if you go to the doctor now, when everything's working or more or less working, it's really important that you know what you're looking for. Today we'll be chatting about blood work. And blood work is really important to get done, and almost nobody does. And almost everybody will just go in for a checkup and get whatever their doctor tells them, and then they're unsure what to do with that information. This show is not meant to treat, diagnose, or cure any disease or illness. I'm just some guy on the internet, and even though we might be dropping medical terms and things like this, please always default to your healthcare practitioner. Inevitably, this show will actually open up more questions than it will answers, but my objective here is just to help you think more proactively and take more ownership of your personal health, starting first and foremost with your blood work. Getting things like thyroid panels, getting a more detailed and comprehensive overview of things like your systemic inflammation, your C-reactive protein, your hemoglobin A1C, your blood sugar metabolism. These kinds of things can really give you great insight into where you're at. So many health challenges that we're dealing with are often lifestyle induced, meaning with some relatively simple diet and lifestyle changes, you can often reverse things that are really, really troubling you, and you can greatly lower your risk for things that could potentially someday have a high fatality rate. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga teacher, a teacher trainer, a serial entrepreneur, and a father of 3 international kids. On this show, I go out into the world and I find authors and experts and medical doctors and functional medicine practitioners and people doing interesting things, and I try to bring their best work here to hopefully inspire all of us to live a more fulfilled life. I got rid of advertising recently, so instead, I will ask you to sponsor the show. Here's how you do it. Just share the show. That's all I'm asking for. So share the show on Instagram. You can tag me. It's at Lucas Rockwood. And if you're listening on your phone, it's really helpful if you leave a review. It just helps more people find the show. Just scroll down in whatever app you're in. Leave a review, and if you can, point people in the direction of an episode that you found helpful. These episodes are all over the map in terms of topics, and there's over 400 of them, so people can use some direction in terms of where to go. Last but not least, if you want to send me questions, DM me on Instagram. It's at Lucas Rockwood. Enjoy. Everyone, today's show is called Understanding Your Blood Work, and I am here with Todd Strong. Dr. Strong is a certified functional medicine practitioner based in Tennessee. He's a kinesiologist and a chiropractor. He helps people with comprehensive personalized treatment plans. He's the author of a book called Understanding Your Blood Work, How It Relates to Your Health Issues. It's available on Amazon. He's got a new book coming out called Reclaim Your Brain. Excited to dig into these topics. You can learn more at stronghealthinstitute.com. Todd, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and definitely looking to just answer any questions that people have and hopefully get some good information out there.
A lot of people in the alternative health community are really negative about allopathic medicine, and I think it gets kind of maligned for wrong reasons. I think it kind of has a PR problem. The doctor, healthcare is not really healthcare; it's sick care. You go there when you have a sinus infection or when you break your arm or this kind of thing, and it's just so great. It's amazing what they can do with modern medicine. But I think a lot of people have these false expectations where they feel like their GP is going to give them preventative care advice, and they feel like their GP is going to, give them diet and lifestyle stuff, and that's just not really what they were trained for, what they're even positioned for. And where I'm going with this is most people go in and get a checkup once every never, like when they need it for health insurance or for a new job or something like that, and they certainly don't ask for what they want in terms of blood workups and things like that. They just take whatever they get. So for somebody who can't remember when they had their last last checkup, much less blood work done, for somebody who wants to be proactive and realizes they've been pretty much reactive to their health for the majority of their life, how would you recommend? Let's just talk about this blood work issue specifically. If somebody's in middle age, feeling a little down, wondering what's up and what's down, what's sideways, how can they approach this from a really functional standpoint in terms of let me be proactive, let me go into my doctor with a wish list? What kind of wish list would you send them into in terms of thinking about checking out their blood work?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Lucas, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. In the traditional medical model, like you said, they're there if you break your arm, if you cut yourself, if you've already got a pathology, but they're not really designed to handle functional issues and preventative measures, right? So that's where the functional medicine comes into play. So it's more of the education process about how to prevent these diseases. And, it's not that you have a pathology. Our main concern is to prevent that, right? So we have markers that we look at to identify like, oh, well, I'm tired, but, there's really no issue that my doctor can really find. And they're maybe saying that it's all in your head or something like that. I have tons of patients who feel that way. And it's one of those things that you really have to understand the minimum changes in the objective blood work that you get to really understand what's going on at a deeper level, at a functional level, right? Because it's not a pathological state. It's just more of a functional issue. So the reason I wrote the book was because most of the time I would notice that my patients go to their doctors and they're like, I got this blood work and I feel this way. Either they're chronically fatigued, they've got migraines, they've got GI issues, or maybe they've got heart palpitations, maybe they've got anxiety or depression. And the doctors say, hey, we got your blood work back and everything's fine. And then the patient comes back and they're like, well, I don't feel fine. What's wrong? And that's, unless there is a pathology and, you've got like hypothyroidism, they find like a tumor or something more severe, then the traditional doctors really can't explain it. And then the functional medicine, what we do is we come in and we're like, hey, look, you're trending in this way and you're just dysfunctional, right? So I wrote this book, and what it does, it gives certain levels of each of the blood tests. And what it does, it tells you, hey, here's the pathological range, which most of the traditional medical model looks at. And they say, hey, you've got hypothyroidism, right? If you've got a certain level of your TSH marker, or, you're anemic because your iron is low or your RBC count is low. So then you've got kind of your optimal range, and that's where you want to be in. And then you've got like your dysfunctional range. So that's when it's like, hey, your biomarkers are telling us that you're going towards a pathological state. And that's when, let's say, for example, the lowest point that your TSH will be is 1.5. And it varies from lab to lab, but let's just take, for example, 1.5. And let's say that you go and get that lab work done and it's at 1.6 and your medical doctor's like, oh, you're fine. Well, is it fine? It's like, no, you're on the verge of developing a pathology. So what we want to do is we want to say it's 1.5 to 4.5 is the normal range. We want to see that level, that TSH level between around the 2.7 mark, right? We want it right in the middle. And that's kind of the optimal ranges that I outline in the book. And I give this to people and my patients so that they can see that for themselves, right? They can go and check, and they're like, because as doctors, we're fallible, we make mistakes all the time. So now you have a resource and you can dig into yourself and you can say, hey, I think maybe you overlooked this. And then you come back to me and you're like, you're right. Let's take a deeper dive and look into this. So the book hopefully gives more, I would say, more power to the patient, right? So that they can actually take and look at this themselves, because it's not just you go to your doctor and then they solve all your problems, right? It has to be a symbiotic relationship where we work together to solve the issue, right? I think it's almost, we've got like this kind of persona that doctors, you go to them and then it's just like they snap their fingers and everything is better. But a lot of the times it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy and focus and cooperation between the two to really get to the root cause of the issue. So that's kind of my reasoning behind the book. And, looking now, the basic blood work I think is really good, but the way that modern medicine is going is there are a lot different markers that we can run now. And in my clinic, what we do is we run 3 different tests. We run an adrenal cortex stress profile, we run a GI-FX stool profile, and we run what's called an organic acids. And those are a little bit different than your traditional blood work that you're going to get from your medical doctor. I think while that is good, if it's one of those things that really nothing is wrong, then you have to dive a little bit deeper. And these are the 3 tests that I run. And the great thing about them is we ship them to patients' houses, and they're saliva, stool, and urine. So there's no blood draw. So we ship them to patients' houses, they complete them, they send them back, and then we just schedule a review time. And, most of the time I see something abnormal on every test. I don't think I've seen, a normal test. And these are used to optimize the function and make it more so where we're doing preventative measures of pathology.
What I've found is when I go into the doctor, I'm quite healthy, especially for my age. And so it's sometimes hard to get the doctor to do any tests. And I don't know, I know different doctors in different systems have different restrictions. But from what I understand, the hormone tests are some of the more expensive. So my general protocol has been to come in with a list written out on paper, and I play dumb and I hand the paper over and I say, my other doctor told me I need to get these. And so far it's worked. I get all kinds of stuff done. And the challenge is always coming up with the list. I live in Spain also, and it's kind of a funny system here. They give me a little checklist that looks like a sushi menu, and they tell me to take it downstairs to the lab. And so on the way down, I check a whole bunch of other things as well. And so I end up getting like quite a lot of blood work done. In the U.S., I've been to direct labs before, and again, I just kind of randomly picked an interesting looking profile. But I guess this is where people get stuck. They go into the doctor and they say, I want to get a checkup. And the problem is everybody's got stuff going on, but the doctors are looking in their calendar for the day. And, statistically, 30% of the people who come in are obese. The rest are overweight. Prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, it's all over the place. High blood pressure is all over the place. It's all relative to them. So when they see you, they're like, everything's fine. You're not having a heart attack. You're not passing out. So it's very difficult to get a straight answer. My blood work results have never thrown up massive red flags, but I've certainly had things that I wanted more information on. And because I wasn't a bleeding arm in the doctor's office, very difficult to get attention. So I guess this is what I mean when if patients are going to go in with a little bit of self-empowerment, what kinds of things do they need to think about that their doctors are often overlooking or just, I don't want to even suggest neglect because it's just a different approach, but what kinds of things should they be thinking about?
So most of the time, like with your standard traditional blood work, what they're looking at, like we stated, is that they're looking more for like those pathological issues. A lot of the times what I do is I do the adrenal cortex stress profile. We always start with that because most people's cortisol levels are out of balance, and your adrenals almost tie into every function in your body. So whether it's carbohydrate metabolism, whether it's neurotransmitter, whether it's your sex hormones, fat gain, unable to lose fat, your energy systems. So that's kind of where I like to look at, and I start most of the time. So it's, if you're getting like these basic panels done from your general GP, then and there's nothing really on there. You went through, kind of like used the book, and you're like, hey, everything's still kind of like in the normal ranges. Then that's kind of when we dive into, well, what are your cortisol patterns? And I haven't seen a normal cortisol yet. And I think most of it's just due to the fact of how we live today. And, it's just like, so for anybody that kind of doesn't understand what cortisol is your stress hormone, and that's what you secrete. And it's like, if there's a tiger there, either you're going to fight the tiger or you're going to run away from it. But today in modern society, there's always a tiger, whether it's your job, whether it's your family, whether it's kids. It could be, that you're driving a 2,000-pound vehicle down the road at 60 miles an hour, the state troopers behind you. So it's constantly getting secreted, and it shouldn't be. And if you just Google like cortisol functions, you'll see that probably about 80% of anybody with health issues, it goes back to that cortisol issue. So for me, that's like a very good starting point, and just educating people about that and balancing blood sugars for that. So, eating 5 meals throughout the day, eating a good breakfast, a snack, then lunch, then a snack, and then dinner. That's what I always find out is the best way to kind of balance out your cortisol levels. And then another big mistake that I see is that a lot of people attribute thyroid issues to just, an autoimmune issue, where a lot of the times there's a pathway that, if you look at it, cortisol actually inhibits your active T3. And T3 is basically the metabolically active hormone in your body that's responsible for your metabolism, that's responsible for you burning fat, that's responsible for energy system. So I would argue, and a lot of my mentors argue, that around 80% of this hypothyroidism issue that we're seeing in a lot of people is more related to an primary adrenal issue rather than a thyroid issue.
So you're seeing one of the larger problems is people with chronically elevated stress that's manifesting in elevated cortisol levels.
Yeah, and there's a normal rhythm to cortisol, and I would love to. I could talk about it for a long time, but I really want to get to what other questions you have. But if you look at normal cortisol rhythm patterns, a lot of people are just abnormal, right? And cortisol is pretty much what regulates your blood sugar throughout the day. And it's, a lot of people with insomnia issues or trouble going to sleep, cortisol has a certain rhythm that kind of correlates with your sleep cycle. And if that's off, then you'll have those insomnia type issues. You'll have trouble going to sleep. You'll have trouble waking up in the morning. And I know for about 80% of my patients, that's the issue, right? They either have trouble going to sleep or they have trouble getting up in the morning, or around that, after lunchtime, they'll start kind of crashing out for the day. So just really balancing out those rhythms helps a lot of my patients resolve most of their issues.
So you mentioned stool samples, you mentioned saliva samples, but in terms of blood work specifically, do you encourage people to go to their GP, work through their healthcare practitioner, or do you send them to direct labs? Should they pay for it out of pocket? How, in terms of people who, if they're being really proactive, what is your recommendation?
Yeah, I think, go to your GP and have them order it. I think it's great to have, it's such useful information. And in the book, we talk about what each panel. So we've got your complete blood count panel, which looks at your white blood cells. You can look at neutrophils, and they'll tell you if you have like more of a preponderance for a bacterial infection, lymphocytes or viral infection. Basophils, eosinophils, look at parasitic infections and yeast infections. So that's a super good one. Your basic metabolic panel will tell you about blood sugars. It'll tell you about your kidneys. It'll just about your overall metabolic function. that's going. Lipid panel, that's a really good one. I find that one to be very interesting, just looking at how well your detoxification system is working, because that correlates a lot to your liver function, because a lot of your cholesterol and stuff is made in your liver. And a lot of people don't realize that. And a lot of your thyroid, so this is kind of an interesting fact, 60% of your T3 is actually converted in your liver, and that's your metabolically active hormone. So, I see a lot of people and they have decreased T3, and then it's like, well, maybe you have a liver detoxification or a liver overburden is just what I call it. And your liver has so many toxins in it that it's sacrificing your T3 in order just to kind of get rid of all these environmental toxins, all of these additives that are in processed foods or whatever it may be. And, I find a lot of people, once we do almost like a liver detoxification, then they see a big boost in their ability to burn fat and their ability to just overall have more energy. So that's something I like to look at. Liver panel, looking at your GGT, ALT, AST, those are kind of proteins that are made in the liver that can tell you about liver function. Thyroid panel is something that I have a lot of questions about. Most doctors only run your TSH, but I recommend that you ask them to run like your T3, reverse T3. That's a very good inflammatory marker. T4, your TPO antibodies, and then TSH. And that's generally a good run of the mill of what you should look at. And, most practitioners just run TSH and they're not giving the overall picture of what's going on, because if you have a lot of T4, but not a lot of T3, well, that goes back into the liver. Maybe you're not converting it correctly into the T3. So that's something that I like to kind of educate a little bit more, is like, hey, make sure they're getting all of this information. TPO antibodies will tell you if you have an autoimmune issue with the thyroid. And then there's iron testing, looking for anemias. In functional medicine, we always say the number one thing you always have to rule out is anemia, because it's more common than you think.
Yeah, something like 2 billion people have anemia or something like this, right, in the world. It's like,
I mean, it's a pretty big factor, and then there's iron deficiency anemia, and then there's B12 or pernicious anemia. So, and a lot of the time that's due to like inability to break down certain foods, or you're not able to absorb B12, or you have like an overgrowth in your small intestine and you're not able to absorb it. So there's so many factors to look at. And then we also talk about inflammatory markers in the book as well. Hscrp is one of the ones that I really like to look at, that just tells you about, and what that stands for is that stands for a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And that's just a very good indication of how much general inflammation is going in through your body. So you can see there are a lot of other markers that you can look at too. You can look at D-dimers. You can look at your, what's another one that you can look at? Your fibrinogen. That's a really good one that I'll look at as well. And a lot of those will tell you about autoimmune issues, if you have a lot of inflammation going on. And then the last thing is just a urine analysis, looking at you if you have proteins or blood in your urine, can tell you a lot about your kidney function. In the book, I kind of try to hit on all of the tests that you should get, and all the ones that I recommend people to get. We cover the thyroid in there as well. So I feel like that's a pretty good reference point if you want to go back and look at that, and then you can write them down and take them to your general practitioner and be like, hey, here's kind of like the test that I would like to see. Or if you can find a functional medicine practitioner, because we're more trained in dietary and lifestyle changes. And I feel like we're a lot more equipped to handle those types of issues, especially if you've been to a general practitioner and they're like, we don't have, everything looks normal, we're sorry.
Yeah. And so, if somebody goes in with this big laundry list, though, I mean, how likely are they going to get that covered by insurance? Are they better off just paying out of pocket? Or, what is the likelihood that they can go in and just get a whole plethora of tests done?
Yeah, that's something I use if I'm going to run like cash-based labs. I always run it through what's called principal labs, and they are fairly cheap. I mean, you can get a really good panel, maybe $200 to $300, and you can get almost all the markers that I indicated. Yeah, so because the thing with insurance is you almost think that it's saving you money when in the long run, it's actually costing you more money because then you get a bill back and they're saying, oh, well, we can't cover this. Or, they say like this diagnosis isn't covered by that. Or you have to get a diagnosis. And let's say you get a diagnosis of thyroid disease and then your premiums go up. So now you're paying more over
Yeah.
20 years.
Right.
Because I run a cash-based practice,
Yeah.
and that's why I really don't like diagnosing.
Interesting. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot of the times if it's a functional issue and we can correct it, well, let's not label you as this pathology, right? And then I see a lot of times patients will identify themselves as the pathology, and it gets that ends up getting to be an emotional and mental issue. And so you don't want that, right? Because then you think like, oh, I'm this disease, when you're not. You're a human being that just has a functional issue. Now, are there genetic variants and other factors that, of course, like people do get certain types of diseases? Of course, 100%. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you need to realize that you have a lot of control over it. And, sometimes it's just a basic functional issue that with some real guidance, you can overcome it.
I find that the two big hurdles that people have, and by people I also mean me, is number one, not knowing what to ask for. And then number two is not knowing how to interpret that. So I sort of shared with you my strategy. I just go in with a big laundry list of stuff and check additional boxes. But, last time I got my blood work done, which I guess was about 6 months ago, I was high in potassium, low in zinc, and, well, my vitamin D levels were great last time, but 2 tests ago, I was low in vitamin D. And, I'm sitting there with a general practitioner, and he didn't have any recommendations. He didn't recommend a supplement, didn't recommend anything, just said, yeah, come back in 6 months. And it was like, it was really disappointing because, you talk about, sometimes insurance being more expensive. And I think there's another expense that a lot of people don't realize, which is just lost time. At that point, I'm 3 doctor's appointments in. That's a lot of time away from work. It's a lot of time. And it's like, I didn't really get anything productive there. I mean, I got a list of things that I could go research and figure out on my own. But again, the house wasn't on fire. So, the doctor wasn't freaked out enough to actually take any action except say, come back in 6 months. And I think a lot of people get in a similar situation. They get like a total cholesterol number and they go home with that, or they get a slightly elevated C-reactive protein or whatever, and they go home with that. And they just don't really know what they're supposed to do with it. So it's like, data's great, but if we don't have anything actionable on it, it's almost worse than not knowing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I really like doing the objective test, because they give you physical feedback and they tell you, hey, there is something going on, right? Just take, for example, I had one patient who we ended up running a test on, and she'd went to GPs for years. She had chronic inflammation. She got chronic migraines. She's on like 5 different medications for heartburn and all these other issues. And, it was just like, well, she would take a medication and then she would get another symptom. And then, oh, here's another medication. Oh, and here's another one. And it just led to the spiral. And, we got her blood work back. And, we actually did more of a specific test on her, just looking at organic acids and really how like her Krebs cycle was working and how her neurotransmitters, byproducts. And, we got the test back, and we kind of lined everything out and like, oh, this is why you're having this problem and this problem and this problem. And, she just kind of broke down and she was like, oh, she's like, I thought you were going to tell me it's all in my head, and I'm like, no, here's objective evidence,
Yeah.
And it was just, so she could see what was going on. And that's why I really love doing those tests. And that's why I've gone into the more advanced testing, because I feel like I just get so much better data. But yeah, like you were saying, if your zinc's low, obviously you want to bump that up, because zinc is a very big precursor to your immune system. It's also very essential for hydrochloric acid. So a lot of times you'll find that people who have like GERD or heartburn, they'll have zinc deficiencies. And so, you give them a little bit of zinc, and then, sometimes that issue will go away. And then you said your potassium was high, and what else was it?
Vitamin D was low, but that one I was able to fix through supplements with no problem.
Oh, yeah. Especially around this time of the year for your listeners, there's the SAD disease, which stands for seasonal affect disorder. And I think last January, I ran everybody's vitamin D levels, and 8 out of 10 patients had low vitamin D. And, so that's one thing. Vitamin D3, make sure you're getting plenty of it around this time of the year as we transition. In Spain, are you guys in the winter, or are you?
Yeah, it's fall here, but still, my vitamin D levels. Yeah, I mean, even in the hardest summer, they clocked in low. So I just don't think I get enough. Like, my face isn't enough. I don't have my back exposed to the sun and these kinds of things. So I think I'm just a person who needs to supplement.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm just wasting money on supplements." Well, the biggest mistake that I see people making is they're not doing therapeutic doses. I had a young girl come in, and she was suffering with anxiety, a little bit of depression. And we ran and we looked at her B6 markers, and we did this to the organic acid so we could see byproducts. And she was severely low in B6. And one of the things that we did was, I had to explain to them, we're going to do therapeutic doses for this period of time. Because if you don't do therapeutic doses, it's kind of like throwing a tennis ball at a brick wall, right? It's like you're never going to make change because, well, you may, but it could take years. I think a lot of practitioners don't make the right recommended dosages for supplementation, right? And that's why people get mad, or they're not using high quality supplements. I know that there was a study, like anything you go buy at like GNC or Walmart, or maybe like a bigger brand, around 80% of it was chalk based. So they weren't even the actual supplement.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to one of my clients today, and he was, telling me he's on a Centrum one a day. And I was just like, well, I mean, that's fine, but there's just nothing in there. You can't, you know what I mean? Like an actual, even mildly comprehensive multivitamin requires like 8 horse-sized tablets a day. It's just it's not really possible to pack much into those things. But I find that there's so much resistance to supplementation. People feel it as if it's some sort of like personal defect, that their diet is imbalanced, or these kinds of things. And the thing that I always say is like, I always use that stat. I think it's WHO has 2 billion people anemic or whatever it is. People in some African countries nearly blind from vitamin A deficiency. It's not like something unique. It's not like a belief system. People often say like, I don't believe in supplements. It's like, this isn't like a religion. This is just like a fact of nature, right? Mm-hmm. There are hurricanes, there are earthquakes, and there is widespread like vitamin deficiency and mineral deficiency. It's endemic. It's all over the place. And it's also not new. Mother Nature is mean and wicked and imbalanced, and California burns, and then Florida gets a hurricane, and your body is low in something, and then it's high in something. Maybe we were born into this world, if you're lucky, as a little angel, but that doesn't last very long. It's just, I'm not sure why people have such hangups. But wow, people hate taking pills. They really, really hate taking them. The compliance rate, I mean, even on prescription medication, one of the big killers in the world is people not taking their prescription medications. It's just really hard to get people to take stuff, which is a big hurdle to overcome.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. And, the thing about supplementation is, one, most people are running like a Ferrari today. It's like you're going 100 miles an hour. And if you're not fueling appropriately, like when you run out of gas, it doesn't matter if you have a Ferrari or not, right? It's just going to sit in the garage. So it's one of those things, like if you understand at what level you're going to be running at and doing all of these things, especially moms, you all go so hard and you do so much. And it's one of the, you've got to fuel yourself. You got to fuel yourself appropriately. And that's why I tell everybody to eat 5 times a day. And the reason, if your diet isn't perfect, then you need to do supplementation, right? You could eat a perfect diet, but one thing is we don't have time for it today. most of us don't know how to eat or what to eat properly. And a lot of the foods that you get nowadays are fortified or they're supplemented with vitamins and minerals. I mean, if you look at how many people eat processed like cereals or anything, why do you think they always say fortified or reinforced with, and then they've got this list of vitamins and minerals? Because a lot of those foods are robbed of that when they're processed, right? So I don't know. I know that there are a lot of people who aren't eating natural foods that are mineral and vitamin sufficient. And one of the things that I tell a lot of my patients is, from your day-to-day function, you need proteins, fats, and carbs. Those are your macronutrients. For you to have long-term sustainable health, such as proper estrogen, testosterone, proper thyroid balance, proper neurotransmitter balance, you need vitamins and minerals. Those are your micronutrients. And so you're not getting enough of those, and you become depleted after so long of not getting those in. And if you look at it, that's why we have so many chronic diseases. That's why so many people are on hormone replacement therapies, why they have low libido, why they have no energy. And it's because we're micronutrient deficient. We're not macronutrient deficient.
Todd, great conversation. I know a lot of our listeners will want to pick up your book, take some action, get some blood tests done. We'll send them to your website, send them to Amazon. What's the best place for them to connect with you online? Are you on social, or where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook is a good place. The Strong Health Institute is my page. You can find me, Todd Strong, DC, CFMP is my name on Facebook. You can shoot me a message. My website is stronghealthinstitute.com. If you want to check that out, I believe I have my books on there. And then all my information is on there. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody who wants to chat or needs help or has questions. More than happy to always give my information out.
One of the most common trouble areas for yoga students is their hips. People complain about tight hips and tight hamstrings probably more than any other spot on their body. The reason our hips are so tight in Western culture is because we never sit on the floor. We almost never squat down. In fact, our range of motion in terms of our hip flexion and extension is so shockingly limited that by the time most people are in their 20s, they can't really sit on the floor cross-legged comfortably. Their back's all hunched up and their knees are way up off the ground. And this affects all kinds of things. It affects your standing posture, your running gait, of course, your ability to do yoga. Probably half the poses in yoga demand a certain degree of hip mobility. And it also leaves you susceptible to injuries. If you have dysfunctional movement patterns, if your posture is wonky, you can't really lift weight up off the ground. You can't really move like a fully functional human. So it's really important to open up your hips. It just feels great also. You're more comfortable when you travel. You can get through yoga classes more comfortably. You'll also find all different movement practices, whether you're weightlifting in the gym, out for a run, or just doing anything that you might like to do for fun, like skateboarding or surfing or whatever it is just easier when your hips are open. A lot of people don't even realize how blocked they are. I get a lot of questions. We teach a pose called Blaster in our gravity yoga series that's very popular. In any case, a lot of people want to come take my classes. I usually just teach training courses these days, so I'm not that accessible, which is a shame. I'd like to do more public classes, but I'm traveling, I'm teaching, I'm writing, I'm doing these podcasts, and I don't have much time. In an attempt to make myself more accessible and to connect with my listeners, I'm doing a 21-day hip opening challenge. It's a private program. It's available on Instagram in a private group. It's really simple. I know you already have Instagram. You just sign up for the program, you join through the app, and every day you'll practice with me live on video. I will share with you my best hip opening stretches. I'll answer questions. We'll talk about anatomy. I'll show you some bones and some anatomical stuff to think about and show you how to do gravity yoga breathing and practices to really open up your hips. Now, in 21 days, the question is, can I really make progress? And the answer is absolutely. You'll make huge progress. But even more importantly, you'll set the stage for some really massive transformations. When it comes to mobility, usually about 80% of the gains you'll ever make are made in the first year, and usually about half of those gains are made in the first month. So it's really big gains. You'll notice it right away. And it's pretty fun as well. Hip opening poses are really intense and very rewarding as well. I usually do it right before bed or in the evening because the breathing that we do with gravity yoga tends to put you to sleep. In any case, to learn more, go to yogabody.com. Scroll down, you'll see upcoming courses, the 21-day hip opening challenge. I hope you can join me. This week's nutritional tip comes in response to a listener question from listener Sarah S. on Instagram. Sarah says, Lucas, I'm addicted to chocolate, trying to cut back. I'm trying to figure out, is it the sugar, the caffeine, or something else, maybe just the habit that makes me keep coming back? Chocolate is really interesting from a nutritional standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. It's like coffee or beer or wine or fermented foods, just kind of interesting in terms of its role in society as a coveted plant. A couple of interesting things about chocolate. When people develop a habit, there's a few different things going on, usually one of three or a combination of the three. The most common one is just sugar. A lot of people are eating sweet chocolate bars, and it's probably just a sugar hit that you're craving and addicted to. If you're eating dark enough chocolate, there is enough caffeine there that you could create a little bit of a habit towards that. Probably the most likely culprit, though, is something called theobromine. And theobromine is an alkaloid, and it's found in abundance in chocolate, probably more abundant in chocolate than anything else in your kitchen or your grocery store. And it's kind of a feel-good alkaloid. It has really positive effects on humans. Now, it's potentially toxic to dogs. If you've heard that dogs get poisoned from chocolate, it's that theobromine that can do it. So don't feed it to your dogs. And with humans, as long as you don't eat too much, it seems to make people feel really great. And that could be why, Sarah, you're coming back to chocolate. I have found that to be true for myself and for a lot of other people. Here's something you might try. Yerba mate tea from South America. Very inexpensive. I find it really delicious. It's another really high source of theobromine that most people in Western countries are not consuming. And it can be a really simple way to get your theobromine hit. And at least for me, when I'm finding that I'm craving chocolate and I don't want to eat chocolate for whatever reason, theobromine in yerba mate tea can really give me that same hit. Hope that's helpful.
Hi Lucas, I was just wondering if you can help me with my fat loss. I've been trying, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I do not do wheat, it's just an occasional treat thing. Sweets are also limited. I do rice, but not more than like 1/3 of a cup. I'm not good with vegetables, so I am starting to incorporate them. My meat portion is okay. Is there a way I can send you week schedule just for you to look where I am messing up? It has to be something which I'm not doing because it's just not working for me. I would appreciate your help if you can. Thanks. Bye.
I remember when I was a kid on the playground, other kids who are so cruel would make fun of overweight kids saying, they think they have a chemical imbalance. Ha ha ha. They just eat too much. And the reality is that almost everyone with a chronic weight problem has a chemical imbalance. Almost everyone with a sleep problem has a chemical imbalance. Almost everyone with a chronic mood, mental health problem has a chemical imbalance. Why? Well, because we're chemical beings. Our hormones play such a key role in everything we do, from how we feel in the morning to who we're attracted to what kind of food looks and tastes good. And imbalance is the norm. We get imbalanced all the time. So what do you do with that, Aisha? So if you're looking at a challenge where you're having trouble losing weight and losing body fat specifically, a lot of times we'll talk about changing your body composition. It's a complicated thing to unpack, but I would look first at the mental and emotional stress aspect, meaning how's the support system in your life on a scale of 0 to 10? How's your stress level on a day-to-day basis? Are you dealing with loss or trauma? That needs to be resolved. I'm not the guy to talk to in terms of resolving those kinds of things, but I know from doing this work for so long that can be a really big issue for some people. And then let me just give you a few high leverage things that we always start with. And sometimes just these 3 high leverage things can be enough to make a big difference. The first one is meal timing. So make sure there's at least 12 hours between dinner and breakfast, last food in, first food in. And if you can comfortably, meaning no strain, no jitters, no craving, if you can bump that to 14 hours between dinner and breakfast, even better. And if you can bump that to 16 hours, great. But I don't want you to be starving or forcing or anything like that. So 12 minimum, and and 16 hours maximum. Next thing I'd like you to think about, Aisha, is throttling your carbohydrate intake. And so it sounds like you've gotten rid of a lot of wheat and you're not having much rice. This is all great, but I want you to take a look at added sugars and take a look at other sweet potential things, including root vegetables and everything, and try to get your total carbs to meet. Here's a simple formula. Let's say you would like to weigh 150 pounds. If you take that number, 150 pounds, and just turn it into grams, try to have your daily carbohydrate intake hover around 150 grams. It doesn't have to be exact. Please don't weigh your food or use all these crazy calculators. Just get more or less in range. And that's, for most people, relatively easy to do. Just cutting back a little bit on carbohydrate. And then simultaneously, obviously, you'd boost up fat and protein to compensate. And one more tip that I'll give you, which I find really helpful, is to start off your day with protein. So it sounds like you're eating some meat and some other proteins. If you can start your day with that, it can make a big difference. Of the three macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrate, protein is the most satiating. It fills you up the most. It also doesn't hit your blood sugar very much at all, unless you have tons of it. So it can be a really great way to start your day and set you up for a metabolically balanced day. So I often encourage people, get that 12-hour, 14-hour, 16-hour window of no eating at night. And then from there, start off your day with 30 grams of protein, whatever kind of protein you like. I think I'll just leave it at that. See if those simple tips could be helpful. There's so many different paths you can go down. It gets really complex really quickly. The thing I always like to remind people is that most people who are thin and happy with their weight, they're not more disciplined than you. They don't have special information. Sometimes they have special information, but usually not. But usually what happens is there's just these little minor tweaks and changes. And when you make those, sometimes you get your body back to a place where it would like to be. The only caveat being, in many cases, we take years or even decades taking our body to a place where we don't want it to be, whether that's loss of strength or loss of muscle mass. And sometimes it can take a number of months or even a number of years to get back. Well worth the journey, but what I'm suggesting is in some cases, you need to be a little bit patient. I appreciate you sending in your questions. If you're listening and you'd like to send a question, go to Instagram.com and it's at Lucas Rockwood. You can direct message me there. Thanks. Thanks for listening to The Lucas Rockwood Show. If you enjoy the podcast, I have two asks of you. Number one, share the show on social media with your friends and tag me. My handle is at Lucas Rockwood. Number two is please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, every week I send out information about the podcast, behind the scenes stuff, announcements of online classes and special events. I email about once a week. You can do that at yogabody.com/sign me up. And right now we have a free breathing worksheet on that page as well. It's yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.